We begin our show with that breaking news out of Ukraine and the besieged southern city of Mariupol.
This morning, Russia's defense minister told President Putin that Russian forces have fully captured the city, except for that steel plant where about 2,000 Ukrainian troops are said to be holed up. Putin has canceled plans to storm the plant. Instead, he ordered his troops to keep up the blockade on that facility so that, quote, a fly cannot pass through. Ukraine's deputy prime minister has urged Russia to allow civilians and wounded soldiers to leave the steelworks. Wider evacuations out of the city are still limited, with only a small convoy of buses managing to get civilians out yesterday. And later today, U.S. officials tell NBC News President Biden is expected to announce a new military aid package. In a meeting with military leaders yesterday, the president hailed NATO's response to the conflict.
I've never seen NATO as united. I'm confident, in my view, this is Biden speaking, that I don't think that Putin counted on being able to hold us together.
NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Lviv. So, Raf, let's start with that breaking news this morning out of Mariupol. What is the latest on the standoff at that steel plant and Putin's decision to not storm the facility?
Joe, Vladimir Putin saying on Russian state television that his forces have successfully, quote, liberated the city of Mariupol. That is one way to describe what they've done there. He says he sees no need at this point for them to storm the steel plant where those Ukrainian fighters are holed up. Instead, he is content for them to maintain the siege around the perimeter and then continue on with their activities inside Mariupol. Now, there are two ways of looking at this. On the one hand, you could see this as a sign of Russian success, that they have so comprehensively surrounded that steel plant that the Ukrainian soldiers inside are really no longer a threat to their activities in Mariupol. But, Joe, another way of looking at this is that Putin is admitting he is unable to take that plant by force. And so he is going to have his troops camped out along the perimeter there for as long as they need to. These are troops who are needed elsewhere on the Eastern Front, and he is just going to have to wait because he cannot outfight these Ukrainian troops. Now, you and I have been marveling for days now at how these Ukrainians have continued to fight. They seem prepared to fight to the death rather than lay down their weapons and survive. But, Joe, when you look at what happened in Bucha, when you look at what happened in Borodyanka, you can see why these Ukrainian fighters and the civilians who are with them are very concerned about what might happen to them if they do lay down their weapons and go into Russian custody. Now, an advisor to the mayor of Mariupol saying this morning they have discovered a mass grave in a small village to the west of the city. NBC News has not independently confirmed that, but if it is the case, it may be a sign of the horrors we are yet to see inside Mariupol. Jeff?
I mean, Raf, the Ukrainians had suggested unconditional talks on the future of Mariupol before this latest development here. What are Ukraine's leaders saying about the situation there right now?
They are saying that they are prepared to send a special team of negotiators to Mariupol to talk not about peace across the whole country, but about the very specific situation inside this steel plant. One of President Zelensky's advisors earlier today putting out a pretty emotional tweet. I want to read you just a little bit of it. He said, yes, without any preconditions, we're ready to hold a special round of negotiations right in Mariupol, one-on-one, two-on-two, to save our guys, Azov, military, civilians, children, the living and wounded, everyone, because they're ours, because they're in my heart forever. Now, Joe, the Ukrainians continuing to try to broker talks with the Russians, but at this point there is no sign from the Kremlin that they are interested in talking. They have that steel plant surrounded. They are bombarding it, and it looks like they will accept nothing short of unconditional surrender. Jeff?
Quickly, Raf, beyond Mariupol, what are we seeing in Kharkiv and really just this general offensive in the east?
We're seeing the Russians advancing, but they're advancing slowly. In that key province of Luhansk, the Ukrainian governor says 80% of his territory is now in Russian hands. He's advising his citizens to get out before they're overtaken by Russian forces. Joe, you remember the town of Kramatorsk, where that train station was hit by Russian rocket fire. 59 civilians were killed, including 7 children in that attack. Kramatorsk once again in the Russian sights. They are advancing into that area. President Zelensky says he's cautiously optimistic he'll get the weapons he needs. Jeff?
All right, Raf, thanks so much.
Let's now bring in Joe Cerencioni. He's a nuclear expert and a distinguished fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thank you, as always, for being with us this morning. So let's start with this news out of Mariupol and the reports from Russia that they've taken the city. What kind of impact would that have here on this war?
Well, Savannah, it doesn't appear that what Vladimir Putin said is true, but truth has never mattered to Putin. The resistance in the city continues, but it may be true enough. He's effectively controlling the city, even though there's these pockets of strong, determined resistance. That will make it difficult for the troops to operate completely freely in the city, or what's left of the city. He hasn't so much captured this town as he has destroyed it and forced almost everyone to flee. We estimate there were 20 to 30,000 people dead, civilians killed in this battle for Mariupol. The reason he wants to do this is twofold. One, propaganda purposes. He wants to declare a major victory, and this would be his biggest victory in the war so far before the annual Armed Services Day on May 9th. And he wants to consolidate a land bridge from the Crimea territory that they control in the south through the region of the Donbass region to the east. This will allow him to do so, but it's unlikely he's going to have unimpeded control of the city for weeks, maybe months to come.
Just horrible to hear about that civilian loss there, which we, of course, don't know the full extent of yet. Now, later today, President Biden is set to speak about the war in Ukraine. It comes as U.S. officials have said the White House is preparing yet another military aid package. What needs to be included in that package? And considering this news that we're just discussing out of Mariupol, are there any new steps the president should be considering?
Yes. One, this is a major new aid package, $800 million. This is on top of the $800 million package from last week. It includes heavy combat equipment. So we're talking about artillery rounds, armored personnel carriers, helicopters, Russian-made helicopters that we secured during the Afghan war that the Ukrainians are trained to fly. We should note the trend here. We're moving towards heavier and heavier equipment. There'd been some concerns that giving this kind of equipment could prolong the war, perhaps escalate the war, but Biden appears willing to do it. The other steps he might take are things that people are now recommending to declare that Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism. This would significantly increase the sanctions and international pressure on Russia. I wouldn't be surprised to see that kind of declaration in the week ahead.
Joe Cerencioni, as always, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, sir.
Now to the battle over mask mandates on public transportation. The Department of Justice says it is appealing a federal judge's ruling which brought a halt to the CDC's mask mandate for travelers on most planes, trains, and buses. The DOJ says the decision to appeal was made in part to preserve that authority for the CDC to have in the future. CDC believes the mandate is still necessary for overall public health. The agency originally extended the mandate to May 3rd as it continued to look at data from the most recent BA.2 subvariant. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb says we may be close to seeing the BA.2 wave slow down.
At this point, I think we can lift the mandate. I'm not surprised they extended it out a couple of weeks. We're in the setting of a surge of B2 infection right now. It's regionalized. It's mostly in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, some parts of Florida. I suspect we're much deeper into that surge than we know because we're not measuring all the actual infections that are occurring. I suspect we're only capturing 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 infections because a lot of people are either testing at home or not testing at all. And I think this is going to be over sooner than we think. I think we're much deeper into this surge. So 2 more weeks, things may look much different in terms of the pace of the infection here in the U.S.
The mask mandate will not be enforced as the DOJ moves forward with its appeal, but new polling suggests 56% of people are in favor of the mask requirements on public transportation. Many of those people plan to keep wearing those masks despite the ruling. Dr. Tina Carroll Scott joins us now with more. She is the medical director at South Miami Children's Clinic. Good to have you with us. So that poll tells us the majority of people think we should keep the mask mandates, but many also celebrated the decision to drop the masks, saying it was a long time coming. How difficult do you believe it's going to be to have people put masks on if, say, that decision is reversed or they need to come back for any reason?
So I think it's actually going to be very difficult. You know, it's sort of like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And, you know, I think the debate around the mask has been one of the most disappointing aspects of this pandemic and how it's become so politicized. And masks really have been an important part of our mitigation efforts over the last 2 years and helped to drastically reduce the spread of this virus. And, regarding airplanes, although planes actually have a great filtration system and more people are vaccinated now, no mitigation measure by itself is perfect. And so the more layers that we add, this Swiss cheese approach that we've talked about throughout the pandemic, we'll add an extra layer of protection when it comes to reducing transmission, especially on an airplane. And, we also need to remember that we still have lots of people in our community who are high risk for a variety of reasons and remain vulnerable, even if they're fully vaccinated and boosted. And we still have a huge subset of kids under the age of 5 who aren't even eligible yet. And so, I think it's easy to only consider our individual risk when deciding whether to wear a mask. But I think we have a responsibility to protect all of those around us as a member of a society.
I remember 2 years ago, early in the pandemic, when we were wearing masks, we were told, my mask protects you, your mask protects me. So I still have that on my mind when we think about people who are not comfortable traveling without a mask. I mean, how much does my mask for me, how much protection does that offer against COVID if no one else around me is wearing one?
So I think masks still provide protection, even if others around you are not masked. And definitely wearing a high quality mask, such as an N95 or KN95, provides substantially more protection. So I think something is better than nothing. But the ideal situation is if others around you are masking as well. If we have, two-way masking, especially in enclosed spaces, without the ability to social distance.
And finally, doctor, among those who are most worried, you mentioned it. It's parents with kids under 5 and immunocompromised people and their families. Do you think we are doing enough to protect vulnerable people, especially those who are immunocompromised?
No, I actually don't. And, as I stated before, we have a huge subset of children under the age of 5 who aren't even eligible to be vaccinated yet. 18 million children actually under the age of 5. And as a pediatrician, it saddens me that it seems like we've just forgotten this population as we go back to life as normal. And although children have fared well throughout this pandemic, when it comes to not getting severely ill or dying, we've had 400 children younger than age 5 who have died from COVID since the start of this pandemic. And, and I think we've yet to see what the long-term effects of this virus will have on our kids. So although I know in many areas across the U.S., it looks like this pandemic is over, it really is not. And, and it's not over, especially until we get the youngest of kids the opportunity to be vaccinated, and really the rest of the world.
Dr. Tina Carroll Scott, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, after 2 years of the COVID pandemic, a growing number of U.S. airlines are ending those mask requirements on flights.
Yeah, it comes after a federal judge struck down the Biden administration's policy that mandated masks on public transportation. And now we're joined by Scott Kirby. He's the CEO of United Airlines. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, Mr. Kirby. Thanks for your time. So there are a lot of topics we want to get to you. But first, let's start with what we were just talking about with the doctor there and what we just mentioned, these masks on flight, especially as we head into this busy summer travel season. I want to get your reaction to the news this morning that the Department of Justice will appeal that decision to end that mask mandate on airlines. So if the mandate were to go back into place, how do you handle that? What do you think of this appeal, especially since it sort of seems the genie's already out of the bottle?
Yeah, so I think the most important point on masks is, it was 2 years ago today that we became the first airline to require masks on airplanes. And what we've learned since then is that an airplane is really the safest place you can be indoors with anyone because of the airflow. It's literally 10 times more airflow than in a hospital ICU. So it is the safest place you can be. And we're really confident that an aircraft in particular is safe for our customers and our employees to be on. With regard to the judge's ruling and the appeal, I think the administration is mostly filing this appeal as a jurisdictional claim to preserve their right to require masks in the future. I think it's very unlikely that you're going to see a mask requirement come back on to aircraft anytime in the foreseeable future.
And so as the doctor was just mentioning a moment ago, what would you say to an immunocompromised person or a parent of a child who hasn't been able to be vaccinated in terms of the safety on your flights?
Well, I'm a father of 7 and have 2 children under 5 who haven't been able to be vaccinated yet. And I'm really confident in their safety on board airplanes. They've been flying. The 1-year-old has never worn a mask because she's been a baby. And I'm really confident of their safety on board airplanes. And the combination of so much of the society being vaccinated, the treatments that are available. I think the doctor mentioned that the incident, the level of severity for children has been low. I feel really good about it. But for those customers who feel uncomfortable that are immunocompromised, we're working with them if they contact us to, push their flights off, give them credits, or if they really want and think they're never going to fly again, to even be willing to give them a refund. So we're trying to work with any customers. And of course, our customers are all welcome and free to wear a mask, as are our employees, if they choose to.
I want to ask actually about your employees, about your staff, and first what the reaction's been like from your flight attendants and pilots on dropping masks. I think a lot of people have seen these videos circulating on social media, people celebrating, things like that, but also about the potential for staffing shortages. I mean, I know United saw some 3,000 employees test positive during the Omicron surge, and that led to cancellations and a lot of chaos at airports. Are you worried about something similar happening with the lack of masks and how that would impact the busy summer travel season?
Well, I'll start with, while it's not 100%, I think the overwhelming majority of our employees are excited to have the mask mandate removed. They're excited to be welcoming customers back. They're excited to be back to uniting people and connecting the world and seeing full airplanes. And there's just a sense of excitement around the whole airline. As far as labor goes, the good news at United is, because we don't really create jobs, we create careers where people have great benefits. They can stay here for their entire career, great pay. And because of that, we've been able to successfully hire 6,000 people already this year. We've staffed up to make sure we're ahead of this. And we've done something a little different than some airlines in the country. We're gradually adding our schedule back because we know there are these stresses and strains. It's not just our own employees. It's all the fuel vendors and the TSA and FAA all have strains. And we're putting our highest priority on operational reliability. We're #1 so far this month in the industry in on-time performance and the lowest cancellation rate. But we're willing to sacrifice short-term profits to make sure that we can fly a reliable schedule for our customers. And we're going to gradually build it back as all the infrastructure builds back up.
I mean, Mr. Kirby, you're going to need every employee you can, because your latest earnings report does paint an optimistic picture, record high demand for travel. But we've been seeing recently some airlines are having to cancel and reschedule flights for a variety of reasons. It's not just COVID right now, but also labor shortages, which you're well aware of. How confident are you United is prepared for this busy summer travel season? Can you tell customers that, hey, your vacation is not going to be impacted?
Yeah, look, you can book with confidence at United. It is different at United. I already said we're #1 in on-time performance this month and the lowest cancellation rate of any airline in the country. What we've done different is we're gradually bringing the schedule back. We're still 13% smaller than we were in 2019. The airlines that are having problems are trying to grow. Frankly, they're trying to grow too fast. They don't have the people and the infrastructure to support it. They're trying to get back to bigger than 2019, and they just don't have the people to fly their schedules. And so they're running into really big problems, and their customers and their employees are paying the price. But we're gradually bringing in the capacity. That's why we're 13%. We'd like to be bigger right now because demand is really robust, but we don't think we can do it and be really confident that we can operate reliability. We're putting the customer first and operational reliability first.
You're still forecasting United's going to turn a profit this year for the first time since before the pandemic. At the same time, consumers have noticed ticket prices are skyrocketing. Many travelers want to know, are we going to see prices go down at some point this year, or could they keep going up?
Yeah, prices are going up relative to where they were, certainly in the pandemic lows. But air travel remains a great bargain. And really what's driving air prices is the rapid increase in oil prices. At one point, our fuel bill over a couple of weeks went up by $5 billion for a single year, and particularly coming out of COVID. We and all airlines are really having to pass that on. And so prices are going up, but air travel remains a great value. My guess is you often will pay less for your air ticket than you pay for your car rental or a single night at the hotel wherever you're going. So air travel is a great value still, but it is coming up from the pandemic lows where it got to in the last couple of years.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your time this morning on All This News.
Thanks for having me.
Time to get a check on your morning News Now weather.
Which means Bill Cairns joins us now. Hi, Bill. Good morning.
Good morning. We're still recovering from that snowstorm 2 days ago in areas of New York and Pennsylvania. I was just looking. I still can't believe it. We're still at 65,000 people without power, and that's what happens when you get this heavy, wet snow in areas of the Northeast. The other storm that we're still monitoring, what happened was the blizzard that happened last weekend in the Dakotas. They are saying that this one killed thousands of cattle. You can see that they were trying to bring food out to the cattle, but it looks like it was been pretty devastating, especially in North Dakota. And why that's also interesting is because there's another storm heading out that way. So very sad scene there in the Dakotas from that blizzard. All right, so let's get into this next storm that we're dealing with. This one is going to have it all. We're going to call this one fire, ice, and severe weather. We're dealing first with the fire problems. We have low humidity, we have gusty winds, and all the dry brush from last winter. So we're going from New Mexico to Texas, and this is going to be a 2-day threat. And tomorrow it goes up to extreme category. So if any fires form, they will quickly spread. And how about this snow forecast? Today, we love it. We're getting about 6 to 12 inches in the mountains of California. Fill up those reservoirs, beautiful. But back up where we just had that last blizzard in North Dakota and also Montana, we have another snowstorm coming your way Friday and a little bit into Saturday morning. Possibility of 6 to 12 inches. And then severe weather. Isolated severe storms today, Wichita to Kansas City. But then on Earth Day, on Friday, we have to watch out for an enhanced risk and maybe even a few tornadoes. So you notice I didn't say much about the East Coast. The East Coast is looking for a fantastic weekend, and I will have that forecast coming up a little later.
Something to look forward to. All right.
Love that. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.